So hello, everyone. My name is Lauren, and I want to welcome you to Voices for Virginia's Children, second Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, which is affiliated with the Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia campaign. And to this event, the community voices at the table taken town hall for Virginia communities. So before I get started, Melissa, I'm looking at you. Can you give a thumbs up or thumbs down if you can hear me? We've had some audio issues, so thank you. I appreciate that. So before I get started, I just wanted to say a few words about Voices for Virginia's Children. Voices is a multi-issue organization focused on policies to improve on child health and well-being through the lens of racial equity and trauma-informed systems. We are home to the Kids Count Data Center. I myself am the research director here at Voices. We are ethically informed by data and have hundreds of indicators of child health and well-being at the state and local level. We also initiate change to produce more equitable outcomes and justice for children through Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia. At Voices, we value the experience of youth, parents, and professionals directly impacted by policies and programs. The mission of Voices for Virginia's Children is to champion public policies that improve the lives of Virginia's children. In direct response to this impact on children and families of the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racism as a public health crisis, Virginia's Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week was founded in 2020. Through Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia, which stems from the evolution of the campaign for a trauma-informed Virginia, Voices takes the mission a step further in acknowledgement of truth of communities to promote healing, reconciliation, and justice for children and families in the Commonwealth. Trauma-informed care and resilience individually acknowledge the desperate impact of trauma, but not as an isolated response. When trauma is experienced collectively by communities, whether geographically, culturally, racially, ethnically, we recognize this as a systemic issue. As advocates, we must change the systems that perpetuate trauma and further combat the root cause of cultural, racial, and historic traumas and long-term inequities and disparities derived from it. We must engage communities in championing their own solutions authentically in acknowledgement of truth to promote healing, reconciliation, and furthermore, collaboratively identify solutions that cures the root cause of the inequity. Through the campaign, we champion trauma and equity-informed policies and justice to ensure a healthy and just future for children and families and youth in Virginia. This week, you will have the opportunity to access a variety of offerings in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, community-centered engagement, advocacy and activism, and policy, equity, and data analysis. We hope you will avail yourself of the opportunity and visit as many of the workshops as spark your interest. But for now, we welcome you to the Virginia's second annual Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week. So next, I wanted to give you an overview of what you can expect for today. First, we will have three presenters who have been extensively involved in the creation of the trauma-informed community networks across the state. And then we will have time for the trauma-informed community networks that are represented here today to introduce themselves and answer a few questions. And then we'll actually open it up to the rest of the community for some questions as well. Finally, we will close with a discussion on authentic engagement and leave time for additional questions and networking. But for now, I'd like to introduce our first presenter. And up first, we have Chloe Edwards. And Chloe Edwards is a policy analyst at Voices for Virginia's Children and the Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia campaign coordinator. She is a policy analyst at Voices for Virginia's Children, and she leads the policy and advocacy work in domains related to the social determinants of health with a focus on healthcare, family economic security, trauma-informed care, equity, and justice. In 2020, Chloe launched Virginia's Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, which was recognized by Governor Ralph Northam. Now the initiative has evolved into a campaign that empowers the voices and experiences of marginalized communities and acknowledgement of truth to promote healing, reconciliation, and justice. In implementation, Chloe shapes the campaign's policy priorities and provides support to the coalition. During the 2021 GA session, Chloe helped lead efforts to successfully recognize racism as a public health crisis in Virginia, making the state the first in the South. Prior to Voices, Chloe served as the director of Connecting Hearts to solve Virginia's child welfare crisis. In 2021, Chloe was recognized by the Valentine as Richmond's history maker for the social justice category and was recognized as a YWCA Outstanding Woman for the Human Relations in the Faith and Equity category. In 2020, she was named on Style Weekly's Top 40 Under 40, and she also received the Outstanding Service Award from Connecting Hearts in 2018 and was named Radio 1 Richmond's Top 30 Under 30 in 2017. She also holds a Master of Public Policy and Leadership from Liberty University and completed the Minority Research and Law Institute program at Southern University in 2013. The University of Virginia Sorensen Institute for Political Emerging Leaders program in 2019, and the Virginia Progressive Leadership Project in 2021. She currently serves as University of Richmond's community partner in residence as a fellow to complete a multidisciplinary racial equity and social justice framework to the policy development process at Voices for Virginia's Children. She is the founder of Chloe Edwards Consulting and president and CEO of Black Lives Matter 804. And I am so proud to call her a colleague of mine. So with that, I will turn that over to Chloe.
Thank you, Lauren, and welcome everyone. I'm going to get started with just kind of some history of the campaign for Trauma-Informed Virginia and the transition into the Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia campaign for trauma networks who are new to the transition, as well as community members. So a little bit of background, the campaign for Trauma-Informed Virginia began around 2018, which is when I actually onboarded at Voices. For those who knew me back then, I was an outreach coordinator, and you all may have been familiar with Mary Beth Salomon Testa, who was the Northern Region consultant to really expand our outreach in that region. Now, the goal was to, and still is, to influence state policy makers to adopt trauma-informed approaches by increasing investments in prevention of trauma, as well as investing in evidence-based practices across the state as it relates to the agencies and organizations that serve children and families. We, the policy team at Voices for Virginia's Children, engage in what we call the feedback loop. So trauma-informed community networks who are on the ground, engaging with the community, and engaging in innovative practices around trauma-informed care to provide feedback to the policy team and directly contribute that to state policy through a unified policy agenda across all disciplines at Voices, which is child welfare and foster care, early childhood and education, community health and wealth, mental health, and then we are home to the Kids Count Data Center. Next slide. Okay, there we go. Now the shift is ultimately from not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you, focusing on the root cause of behaviors and looking at behaviors children express with a level of curiosity by looking at responding to them in a different way, building protective factors rather than focusing on the risk factors, recognizing the innate potential for our systems to re-traumatize those that they are serving, including children and families, addressing the impact of things like compassion fatigue or burnout as it relates to trauma that direct service providers or staff may experience, creating safe working environments, and then allowing individuals to have voice and choice in trauma-informed care service delivery. Next slide. Now, when we think about history, whether it's past or present, what we witnessed over the summer is essentially a modern civil rights movement as it relates to the death of George Floyd, the trauma of the pandemic, the awakening that the entire world experienced, and all of the advocacy and activism that we witnessed. And so Over time, we've had many conversations about equity and acknowledging that all people are truly not equal and that we need to deliver additional supports, resources in order to for everyone to reach the potential that they have innately as it relates to the pursuit of happiness and where people live, work, and play. Now, I don't want to say this is what the pandemic showed us, or this is what the death of George Floyd showed us, because we witnessed numerous deaths from Emmett Till decades ago up until now, amongst other injustices as it relates to Stop Asian Hate and other civil rights movements. And so, furthermore, we at Voices have experienced an equity transformation. The trauma work has been evolving over the few years. And so equity continues to be a consistent present. And so we looked at this with a level of curiosity amongst leaders on this call today and others to say, let's really hone in on the impact of cultural, racial, historical trauma, because that's quite intersectional when it comes to trauma-informed care and equity. Also recognize that when we talk about history, well, some communities, Black communities specifically, they've had to be resilient for over 400 years. And is it really fair for us to continue to ask people to have to be resilient when we know it's really not a choice? And so then we move from this perspective of what ultimately led to Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week and the birth of this campaign, which is to acknowledge the truths of communities, regardless of our limited perspectives and our ability to understand those truths holistically, to promote healing as it relates to the burnout that comes with this work, but also as it relates to reconciliation and justice. And so this is what the campaign seeks to do, is dismantle systems that perpetuate trauma, which we would refer to as systemic trauma. When we think of the Indigenous Trail of Tears, the Holocaust, those are all examples, and systems that perpetuate oppression and inequity. And so these goals were created collectively amongst, I know Audra was on that call with Hampton Roads, Brian Little with Southside, amongst other networks, to really look at trauma in an intersectional way, acknowledging LGBTQ plus community, individuals with disabilities, individuals on the IDD spectrum, other oppressed communities, and to pursue trauma-informed care, equity, and justice for children, youth, and families in Virginia. Now, to implement the work, we do it through our coalition, as well as the support of our trauma-informed community networks in our committees, including engagement, education, partnerships, and advocacy and activism. Next slide. You'll find during the week we'll present on other topics such as trauma-informed care and healing-centered engagement, but ultimately it's the shift from not what's wrong with you to what's happened to you, but also acknowledging what's right with you and seeing those that we're serving as leaders, community members as leaders and agents of change, and empowering them to create change, to step into leadership in whatever they're empowered to feel that should look like. Promoting protective factors, once again, rather than the risk factors. Identifying disparities and recognizing the root cause of trauma that is experienced collectively, collective trauma by communities that share similar identities. And then we really want to pick that apart as well. There is a presentation on racial equity impact statements, for example. And so in policy, we have a responsibility to do this as well. Ensuring resources are distributed equitably to communities that are disadvantaged, recognizing the potential for all of our systems to re-traumatize and perpetuate racism and cause trauma, and then structuring a community-led model to connect communities impacted by policy to decision-making tables and opportunities to inform voices, policy initiatives. And then I want to just add one more thing when we talk about the concept of justice and what that truly looks like. It can be challenging to envision, but ultimately what justice is it eliminates the reason of why we need equity in the first place. It solves that root cause of inequities, and then all people would truly be equal. And I know in this stage that might seem a bit far-fetched, but we have to keep working towards that goal, because it's not just when we have to center equity. It's not just when people aren't innately equal. Next slide. And so what does empowering those, primarily impacted by voices work look like? Well, this year we launched our advocacy cohorts, not just in the racial truth arena, but also in all of our disciplines. For racial truth specifically, we had a caregiver cohort, a youth cohort, and then we also had artists who also are community members as well, because we recognize that art can be a powerful activism tool. Now, all of these individuals participated in legislative meetings and championed change during the last General Assembly session, and kudos to them because it was virtual and very different, but it was successful in our first year of having a cohort like this affiliated with the campaign. Next slide. Okay. And so part of our session successes was Delegate Aird's House Joint Resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis, which made Virginia the first state in the South. There was the first step is diagnosing the issue. It is a first step, however, because the resolution is not necessarily backed up by funding, but what it does is present key priorities moving forward. And that's expanding the Virginia Department of Health's Office of Health Equity to be the primary point person for ensuring policies that address racism are implemented. These priorities would also take place within the governor's administration as well. It makes the commission to examine racial inequity in Virginia law permanent. And this is really that connection to policy recommendations as a result of the work of that commission in the future. It establishes training for all state elected officials, their staff members, and state employees to recognize racism. It creates a list of definitions on terms related to racism and health equity. So important to make sure we're all speaking the same language and know what those terms mean to each of us, because we know our perspectives can often shape our interpretation. And then key point, promoting community engagement with those most impacted by racism as a best practice. Next slide. And while there were other session successes that you can visit on our website, these are just the key ones I'll point out in the interest of time. We also just had our emergency special session here in Virginia. The trauma-informed community networks were allotted $1 million to the Department of Social Services for the networks to provide community awareness campaign, education, professional development, mini grants, and other initiatives to support existing networks. A huge win for Virginia's trauma-informed community networks, given that we have advocated for funding in the last, I believe, 2 years since I've been at Voices. 2 or 3 years. Next slide. Another one thing I wanted to point out, and when we talk about how intersectional trauma-informed care really is the idea of a sense of belonging, which really came up earlier today if you didn't get a chance to watch the governor's panel and the administration panel. But imagine a sense of belonging that a child would feel or lack thereof when there's not language access across our systems, or when parents are unable to understand even the services that could be offered without language access. So we were very pleased here at Voices to see that $500,000 was included for the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for language access and translation planning. A first step, they would examine which state agencies have the highest need for translation services by November 1st of 2021. First step, we'd like to see interpretation, as well in the future, but at least we can draft a plan. Next slide. And so when we talk about a vision for Virginia, ultimately what this week is about is future for Virginia's children, youth, and families. We're working on other initiatives here at Voices, such as undocumented children's access to, or covering all kids, regardless of their racial or ethnic identity, regardless of their immigration status. We're also working with the YWCA at the local level around an ordinances to declare racism as a public health crisis, but to take it further with best practices such as funding and equity impact data analysis, amongst other issues. So we encourage you to just keep in touch with us and the coalition, as well as your local network in the Virginia State Ticket to take advantage of opportunities to advocate. Next slide. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague who I've had the pleasure of working with for a number of years, who's very familiar with Voices, Nicole Pulin, Executive Director of the Family and Children's Trust Fund of Virginia. For the first 13 years of Nicole Pulin's career, she worked in the nonprofit sector for programs focused on domestic and sexual violence, child abuse and neglect prevention, housing and homeless services, and teen pregnancy prevention. She carried that experience and perspectives to her work within state government over the last 15 years in management positions within the Department of Housing and Community Development, Department of Health, Department of Medical Assistance Services, and now as Executive Director of the Family and Children's Trust Fund. I'm sorry if you hear my dog in the background. Of Virginia. Nicole is a self-proclaimed policy nerd with a strong interest in research focused on intersectionality within social justice issues. She believes that society is only as strong as its most vulnerable population, that we belong to each other. Nicole holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Old Dominion University in sociology and criminology, and has participated in multiple classes and trainings on various public policy and social issues over the last 28 years. In her spare time, she focuses with pit bull rescue groups in Central Virginia. Nicole, I'll be sure to invest in a rescue dog next time. But welcome, and we appreciate all of the work you've done with the Virginia Trauma Informed Community Networks.
Thanks, Chloe. Should we get started? Next slide. So the Family and Children's Trust, I always like to give a little bit of background because not everybody is familiar with FACT. The Family and Children's Trust was established in 1986. We are celebrating our 35th anniversary this year. And it was established as a children's trust for Virginia. In the 80s, there was a national movement to establish children's trust funds because at that time, there really wasn't a whole lot of public funding for preventing child abuse and neglect. So states started forming these kind of independent entities called children's trusts to raise money to support services to prevent child abuse and neglect. Virginia is always or often a little different in how we do things. So the trust was established for children and families, and our focus is about as broad as can be. It is focused on the prevention and treatment of family violence across the lifespan. So that includes child abuse, domestic violence, sexual violence, and abuse against older adults. So it's a very broad scope. So to that end, our structure is that the trust is an independent entity. It's a trust that's held in the Department of Treasury. It's classified as a state agency, but it doesn't have any staff affiliated with it. So the Department of Social Services provides administrative support through supporting my position and our part-time senior research associate, who's actually Taylor Davis, who's on this panel. Well, she's a participant in this event. And the trust is overseen by a board of trustees that's appointed by the governors. So it's a unique sort of entity in Virginia, which is why it takes so long to describe it. And it's difficult to kind of, it's not an easily accessible entity to understand. So basically, we do a lot of different things. Our donations are all private, so we don't at this time get any sort of public money other than the administrative support. So we get donations primarily from our license plate program. So if you've seen the kids' first license plates, the money from that comes into the trust. We also have 3 other license plates that have our name on them. For some reason, I'm not sure why, when those were established, that money was established to be split between FACT and a child seat program within the Department of Health, which is a very worthy cause. So we get money from the license plate program, from donations, and from our state income tax returns. When you do your state taxes in Virginia, you have the option of donating your return money to FACT. Since 2003, we've raised probably over $1 million that we've used to support local programs. And we have supported really hundreds of programs and trainings and services focused on preventing and treating family violence over the last 30 years. In 2012, the Board of Trustees, because we have this very complex, broad topic, decided to really start looking at how to synthesize our efforts and coordinate our efforts. And so they became interested in supporting the trauma-informed care networks. And to their credit, this is before I came on with FACT, I think were really pretty innovative in looking at this. And so the idea was to support some community impact models and to really help communities understand and learn about the science of ACEs and begin to implement trauma-informed practices and really start seeing their work through a trauma lens. So that's how we got into this. And it's actually a really wonderful way for us, I think, to look at this issue of multi-generational trauma. Next slide. So some of what we do for Tickens is we provide funding for programs and training. We currently support 7 Tickens in Virginia. We provide technical assistance. We developed a framework document that serves as kind of the baseline for Tickens and was used in our funding decisions. And we also have issue briefs that we issue throughout the Commonwealth and actually nationally on different issues related to family violence. In the last 5 years, we've really taken a narrow focus on the issue of trauma. We had a series on specific trauma-informed strategies to be implemented professionally. Our current issue brief series is focused on more macro social issues, how systems of social injustice impact trauma, because we know that these macro level issues have a direct impact on individuals and families. So the first in that, and Taylor, thank you, just posted those resources. The first in that series was focused on poverty and how that impacts trauma. Our second was on race and how that impacts trauma. And we are now currently working on a 2-part brief focused on sexism and how it affects women, and also how it affects the LGBTQ+ community. So those should be out within the next year. Recently, something that we're very excited about, the Board of Trustees allocated a pool of money that we are calling the FACT Emergency Funds Project. Next slide. We know that when families are going through financial crisis, which many of our families that we're working with are, that one incident can really derail families. So I know when I was working in direct services, something like needing a car repair for $300 could mean that somebody would potentially lose their job because they couldn't get to work. So the board allocated small mini grants that are available to the Tickens that can be used in very flexible ways to support families. So it's direct financial assistance for families and individuals who have experienced trauma. Taylor just posted the link to that. You can learn more about that, but that's something that we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on. So you can absolutely learn more about that. You can contact us to learn more about that. It's a very simple application process, and I'm hopeful that something that the board will decide to continue. So with that, next slide. This is a cool little animated slide that Chloe did. So I kind of presented our past history of funding. Moving forward, it's difficult to really know what's going to happen if you, with regard to the state money that was just allocated and what role, if any, FACT will have in that. We're working on trying to establish that right now. I know the board is committed to this issue. I know that we will continue with the issue briefs for the next 2 years. I will say that we're going through a sustainability process. So it may be that the model that FACT is in is changed in the next couple of years. So really stay tuned and we'll all see kind of which direction we move in. Is there one more slide? And there's our contact information. Thanks for this opportunity, Chloe, and Voices.
Thank you, Nicole. And now I'll have the pleasure of introducing our next presenter, Melissa McGinn. Let me get your accolades up. They've disappeared on my screen. Oh, here we go. Okay. Melissa McGinn is a licensed clinical social worker and is currently Greater Richmond Scans Director of Community Programs and State Coordinator for Virginia's Trauma-Informed Community Networks. Melissa is responsible for the management and coordination of all SCANS prevention programs, training, and consultation on becoming a trauma-informed organization. Melissa has been an adjunct professor and field liaison at Virginia Commonwealth University for 15 years. Melissa worked at the Virginia Department of Social Services, reestablishing the Child Welfare Stipend Program at 4 universities across the state. Melissa spent the first 14 years of her career as a child and family therapist, specializing in the treatment of complex trauma, working primarily with children in the child welfare system and in community-based and outpatient settings. Welcome, Melissa. You've been a key champion of our work, and I neglected to add that you're also serving as the vice chair for the Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia Coalition.
Thanks, Chloe. Thanks for having me today. We can go to the next slide. So this statement that came out recently from SAMHSA, I think, helps to ground us and kind of why we do this work in our trauma-informed community network. So really building resilient and trauma-informed communities is essential to improving public health and well-being. Communities can be places where traumatic events occur, but they can also help keep us safe. They can be a source of trauma or buffer us against the negative effects of adversity. Communities can collectively experience trauma, much like individuals do, and they can be a resource for healing. Can we go to the next slide? When we talk about trauma, or ACEs, as we've referenced, I like this image of the 3 realms of ACEs, because I think when we often think about trauma, we're often thinking about it in terms of what you see kind of on the leaves of the tree. So the trauma that we often can experience kind of in our home or within our families. But so much of our work really needs to be centered at the roots of the tree, really addressing the impact of structural systemic racism, historical trauma, the impact of substandard wages and substandard schools, the impact of redlining, lack of affordable housing, access to childcare, and on and on. Our work really needs to be grounded in that space. Can we go to the next slide? So over the last few years, the trauma-informed community networks in Virginia have been around since 2012. This kind of concept of this multi-sector, community-led kind of coalition. But over the last few years, this concept of these kind of multi-sector community collaboratives are being recognized by more and more entities, such as SAMHSA. The CDC recently acknowledged, the concept of these multi-sector collaboratives. Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris talked about it as well. Just these are kind of just being recognized as another method for preventing and really mitigating the impact of ACEs and community trauma. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, in 2012, the first of these TICNs in Virginia was established. Greater Richmond SCAN kind of launched the Greater Richmond Trauma-Informed Community Network. And over the last decade, there's been a rippling effect. And to date, this slide shows, in the green area, shows all the different regions of the state that are connected to a trauma-informed community network. And there's 26 of these networks now around the state in many different regions. And there's 3 more that I'm working with that are currently in development. So we're really close to 30, and it's continuing to grow tremendously. The next slide. So back in June, we did a survey of all of the networks in Virginia to really get a sense of, you know, what was happening kind of in their networks. And we asked, one of the questions we asked are, what are some of your current goals and initiatives for this upcoming year? And these were some of the most frequently identified kind of goals and initiatives of these 26 networks. So really centering the work around equity, really increasing community and member engagement and people with lived experience, you know, not just having a group of professionals around the table, but really making this more of a community-led initiative. Increasing, you know, the capacity within organizations to be more trauma-informed, so really trying to build up internal champions within these organizations or systems. Continuing to create that shared language across the region by increasing the amount of access to this information, providing more training opportunities, or just opportunities for public awareness and information about the impact of trauma and resilience. Next slide. And again, like some of the key takeaways, and you're going to hear in a couple minutes from a number of these trauma-informed community networks, but a couple of the key takeaways, especially from doing this survey, was really just recognizing just how diverse these networks are. You know, as I said, there's some that have been around a decade and some that are just getting started, but are just as powerful. So many of these networks are in different stages of growth and really responding to those unique needs of the region. The beauty of these networks are that they are so individualized to the communities that they serve. There's a lot of things in common amongst these networks, but then we also really celebrate and honor the differences and try to avoid comparison between one network and another, and do a lot of work to really share resources, collaborate, and share innovative strategies. We recognize that, especially this year, you know, change is constant, and networks have really adapted to meet those emerging issues and needs, either individually and collectively. And then just really reinforcing that every step towards a more trauma-informed community is an important step, no matter how large or small. Next step, next slide. If you want more information about trauma-informed community networks, we're going to share some of those resources at the end. We do have, you know, several web pages, and we have links to all of the network coordinators who can get you kind of connected to a trauma-informed community network in your region. Or if you noticed on the map that there isn't a network in your region, be happy to talk with you about the steps towards developing one. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. Chloe, did you want to mention anything about the lineup for today, or should we go to the next slide?
This is the last event, but I have posted a link for today, I believe. But I have posted a link in the chat. You can visit www.vakids.org/RTRW conference for other events. Next slide.
Well, welcome everyone to our Community Voice at the Table, Virginia TICN or Trauma Informed Community Network Town Hall. So moderating today will be myself and Tamika Daniel. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Lauren Stellings, and I'm the Research Director at Voices for Virginia's Children. I've had the pleasure of working with several of the trauma-informed community networks represented on the call here today from a data perspective and conducting some equity assessments. And I look forward to working with other future TICNs too. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tamika to introduce herself and to get us started with some questions for the trauma-informed community networks on today.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tamika Daniel, and I'm the Behavioral Health Community Organizer with Greater Richmond SCAN. I started this journey in August of 2019, and I come from the perspective of the community member that we'll be speaking of today. So with that being said, we're going to get started with some of the questions that we have for the TICNs on board today. So first question, briefly tell us about your trauma-informed community network or resilience network and what your network does for the community. Also include how your work has changed during the pandemic.
And maybe we could just do briefly, before we get started with that, just TICN introductions. If you
Sure.
Are the coordinator of a TICN, you can feel free to introduce your network and the geography you're representing today.
I see a few on here, so I may call people out if that's okay. Is Hampton Roads on?
We are. Good evening. My name is Arjun Jackson, and I am the program coordinator for the Hampton Roads Trauma Informed Community Network and the secretary for the Racial Truth and Reconciliation Coalition. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the Greater Williamsburg TICN represented?
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Shari Wiltshire, and I'm the coordinator for the Greater Williamsburg TICN. Stationed in Richmond, but I serve Greater Williamsburg.
Welcome, thank you. Is Southwest, do I see Danielle?
I always have trouble finding my mouse when it's my turn to be called on.
No worries.
I'm Danielle Duff. I am the Community Resilience Manager for United Way of Southwest Virginia, and I serve as the Director or Coordinator of our Southwest Virginia Trauma Informed Community Network, and we encompass 16 counties and cities in Southwest Virginia.
Is Winchester, Tina, are you on?
Hello, good evening. I'm so excited to join you guys tonight.
Oh, your audio may have just gone. Can people still hear her? No? Okay. Can you hear us? We'll come back.
Sorry.
Okay. No, it's working. Yeah, go.
Did it go out? Okay. So I am Tina. I'm the coordinator for the Winchester area Trauma Informed Community Network, which we currently call Resilience Rising. And I'm excited to be here and to see so many familiar faces. You guys have been a critical part of the development of the areas of the way that we want to be intentional with our serving our communities. And we do serve the Warren County, Frederick County, Clark County, and Winchester area.
Thank you. Is Loudoun represented? Or just someone from Loudoun?
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
hi.
Hi, my name is Laurie Tosharsky. I work for SCAN of Northern Virginia as the director of the Institutional Abuse Prevention Program. And SCAN facilitates two TICNs. So I'm here representing both tonight. The Loudoun County TICN, which I facilitate, and the Prince William County TICN, which Leah Fraley, our executive director, and Heather Martinson facilitate. Pleased to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, thank you. Is Alexandria represented?
Hi, yes. My name is Chelsea Eichert, and I coordinate our city's trauma-informed community network called RAISE. and we serve Alexandria City.
Welcome. Thank you. So that's as far down the chat as I got. Are there any other trauma-informed community networks represented on the call here today? Please just take yourself off mute and introduce yourself.
Good evening. I'm Brian Little with the Crater Health District. I'm the Special Projects Coordinator for the Virginia Department of Health's Crater Health District, but I'm also the chair and convener of the Southside TICN. We serve Petersburg, Hopewell, Dinwiddie, Prince George, Surrey, Sussex, Colonial Heights, Greensville, and Emporia. Thank you for having this call tonight.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, and with that, I will turn it back over to Tamika. If you can, just remind us what the first question is, and I think we're just opening up if anyone wants to jump in.
Okay, the first question is, briefly tell us about your trauma-informed community network or resilience network and what your network does for the community. Also include how your work has changed during the pandemic.
I'll start us off.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. So once again, we're based in the Hampton Roads area, Southside Hampton Roads, serving Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Portsmouth, Suffolk, and Chesapeake. And we're excited to really put our hands in the community. First, through education and awareness, we strive to provide consistent monthly trainings as well as a convening of a multi-sector group at least every other month, where we come together and are collaborating across ideas. One of the most important things that I believe that our network does for the community is we ensure that there is a role for every sector and a place for every community member. So whether you want to be fully involved in our network and attend our meetings and actually have input in what we do, there is a place for you. If you just want to receive our newsletters and not really get that involved, there's a place for you as well. And most importantly, whatever sector that you come into the network with, there is always a place for where trauma-informed practices could be utilized. So I think the most thing that we've done for our community is ensure inclusivity just in our membership alone. So thank you.
Ms. Jackson, if you don't mind, would you care to elaborate on how it's changed during the pandemic?
Sure. Thank you, Tamika. I appreciate that opportunity. So I would think the most thing that has changed during the pandemic is we've gone virtual. So we host all of our trainings through the Zoom platform, mostly online. And it really has become a great education of how to provide better trainings online, and as well as to help our community partners do so. In addition to the creation of our newsletter was created to ensure that synergy is created even when we can't be in person, that opportunity to still connect and create connections and relationship is still available through the pandemic.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to chime in?
I'll go. Again, I'm Danielle Duff. I'm from Southwest Virginia Trauma-Informed Community Network, and I'm based out of Abingdon, Virginia, under our United Ways footprint. So our network has really taken leaps and bounds in growth over the past year when we were supported through FACT funding. So shout out to Nicole and her board for supporting our ticket. But we started off with an initial 12-member group that was based from another sub-work group under our Childhood Success Department at United Way, and created what we would deem as our trauma-informed community network, or a spinoff. And so that group has grown from 12 members to right at 100 members in the past year. And we do have pretty consistent engagement as far as 50 to 60 members usually attending our meetings every other month. We recently kind of are starting a strategic planning process. And so we are just now diving into what our work is going to look like over the next 2 to 3 years. But I will say when the pandemic initially started and we were first pulling our efforts and our thought process together, we did create a trauma-informed community resource guide directed at COVID-19 resources per se, when back in November and December of last year. And then we have also created 3 sub-work groups, including a training and awareness work group, data and outcomes, and then a school-based or education-based work group. And then through some cross-collaboration and some blending and braiding of funding, this fall we will be starting our trauma-informed schools cohort, which will be a partnership with our TICN as well as 5 pilot schools who are willing to come on board to help us look to create a trauma-informed schools designation. So that designation will be using the kind of resources of the TICN to help support that the research and effort, and then the data and outcomes committee as well. But we want to look to create an ongoing training calendar of events to support our trauma-informed schools and faculty and staff at every school district and every individual school in our footprints. So it's ever evolving, ever changing. As far as our work in the pandemic, I would say this trauma-informed schools initiative really opened up the door to address social emotional learning loss that has happened over the last year to year and a half in the pandemic, and created this opportunity for us to work with our schools, because they actually reached out to our United Way and our TICN to help them figure out, what should this look like. And some of our schools are newer to this work and addressing trauma-informed care, and what does that look like, and what does it go beyond Trauma 101, and how can we help them create a roadmap through the continuum to be more trauma sensitive and trauma responsive in the classroom and in the community. So this pilot is really kind of opened up the opportunity to address what we feel are going to be gaps that we're going to see both in community-based sectors and our schools for Southwest Virginia. So.
I'll to what Ray's Alexandria's Trauma-Informed Community Network does for our community here. We were established in 2019, and our name stands for Resilience Alexandria, Inform, Support, Elevate, and that we try and embody the acronym of our name by informing our community about the various trauma-informed efforts and resilience building practices happening across the community. We try and support our community members and professionals by offering trainings focused on ACEs and trauma and resilience. And then we elevate our community voices by really trying to ramp up our advocacy efforts, and our partnership with Voices for Virginia's Children really helps us do that. So thank you for building our capacity in that area, because that's how we really elevate our community's needs and support them in feeling equipped to advocate for what they need and to be heard. And I'd say that the pandemic really ramped up our efforts to support our community's health and well-being, especially mental health. We developed a citywide plan that focuses on promoting our workforces and residents' mental health and well-being and resilience during the pandemic, because we know that's a huge struggle for a lot of families and individuals and the workforce. So we created a resiliency guide and resource guide that's online. I can share that in the chat later. And then we hosted a summit, a trauma and resiliency summit, and that really galvanized our community here in Alexandria around the trauma that we're experiencing throughout the pandemic and before the pandemic, when thinking about how racial injustice continues to affect a lot of communities. So it's been a busy year, and I'm so privileged to do this work, and I'm so thankful that these trauma-informed community networks exist so that we can be working together across the entire state to be helping everyone's mental health and resilience.
Thank you so much. We're going to go on to the next question, and that is, what does a trauma-informed care, equity, and justice mean to your network? This question is for anybody that wants to chime in.
I want to chime in. This is Brian Little again with the Southside TICN, and trauma-informed care, equity, and justice means a lot to our network. We have been a part of two Beyond ACEs summits, one in 2017 and one in 2019. And in 2019, we actually did a 2-day summit at the high school in Petersburg, centered around race, culture, and poverty. And so those were 3 topics in 2019 that were resonating before Charlottesville, the incident, before the pandemic, before some of the other things that have happened to us happened. But we realized in our community that we needed to address those things. And we are very equitable. We allow anybody to sit at our table who needs our services or who just needs to be a listening ear. And we've done that when we were meeting in person at the Petersburg Library. Moving forward, we will be definitely looking at TIC, equity, and justice in everything that we do as a network. So we're excited about that opportunity. We're also excited, if I could just take a moment back to your first question, we're excited about what we've recently done in spite of the pandemic. We were able to receive funding from FACT, and I'm proud to say that we were recently able to disperse the funds to the community. Yay, Nicole. So you'll be getting a report from me real soon. And we were able to impact 10 families positively in a time when things were just looking really bleak for them. It took us some time to get there internally because of the way we were set up internally. But now we're able to receive additional funding from other entities through our fiduciary agent, which is Pathways Incorporated, which is a community-based nonprofit in Petersburg. So we're excited about working with community and moving the initiatives forward.
Anybody else like to join in?
Thanks, Tamika. I'll mention that these topic areas were a priority for me when we started out. We probably, like many Tickens, started out with a group that was brought in by an event, screening of the film Resilience. We had seen some tapering off. We had a heavy contingent of school-related folks who were just overwhelmed during the pandemic. We worked on resources and some training events. And what we found was that the makeup of our Tick-In looked a lot like service providers, and professionals and clinicians. And so what we have decided to do starting this new school year is move our meeting times to lunchtime, and so that we can bring in people who are not paid to come to our meetings, which we thought would open us up to more community members, a more diverse to have a more diverse Tick-In. And then we downloaded the spreadsheet from the ACEs connection, PACES connection on DEI recruitment, which is outstanding. I recommend it to anyone. It just breaks down every sector. It gives you ideas. You start putting in community organizations. And then we're right now in a phase of building membership quite intentionally by reaching out to groups, asking them to present in our meeting, and then following that up by asking them to join us. So we recently we're joined by Equity Loudoun County, which is an LGBTQ plus organization, rights organization. So that has been really what we focused on in terms of trying to diversify and be very intentional about creating a space where people are welcome, and we're seeking them, we're inviting them in, and we're going to build around them instead of just expecting people to come to us and feel welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to move on to the final question. And if I could get one or two people to chime in on this one, how does your network incorporate authentic community voice at the table in your decision-making, programming, and service delivery? If you find that your network is still in the process of doing so, how have you worked towards this?
So I'll chime in. I'm a little nervous. But I'll chime in. I'll just say that through our strategic planning, there were a couple things that I wanted to address in terms of what we're doing to intentionally involve the community. And as someone said earlier, we noticed that when we first started, we had a lot of executive directors, and that was not what we wanted. We wanted to really incorporate more parents, people that were non-paid, to be at our meetings, and we wanted to be representatives. So we were very intentional with that. When it comes to equity and justice, in terms of the trauma-informed piece of it, that was in our mission, and strategically planning a way that we can be more equitable. But to your third question, I'm sorry, I just wanted to squeeze those in because I didn't want to. But in the strategic planning, we have worked towards this by making the strategy. I'm sorry, I was reading the comment. We've worked towards this through the strategic planning, which was something new to me. It was very intense, but it's very important that we, address, in decision making and programming, that we incorporate authentic representation of who our community is the makeup of our community and the landscape. And that's all I wanted to say about that.
Is there one more person who would like to chime in before we go on to the next segment?
Sure, I'll jump in there. So I think what we attempted to do to ensure that, and what we're trying to do, I think Lori and Tina did a fantastic job of describing what the goal for, I believe, each and every one of the trauma-informed community networks is, to ensure that we have community voice there and to be intentional about that outreach, whether it's changing the times that we meet, whether it's in the evening, for example, this evening that we're doing right now, having those timing is important to each and every one of us. But I know at Hampton Roads, our goal for the end of this year is to begin applications for a lived experience advisory board. So not just ensuring that we're not talking about it, but ensuring that they're a part of the conversation, that they're reviewing the trainings that we're offering. If we're leaving worksheets or brochures, that they are approving the language that's included in there to ensure that we are actually reaching the community. And then lastly, we have moved to this model of a community-based participatory research, and really ensuring that that is a part of our strategic plan, that the community is involved, and that once again, that every sector has a role and every member has a place. And then just lastly, while I do have the floor, I just do want to shout out to individuals like Jenna White and Kelly Henderson, who I saw on the call, who reached across Tickens and other trauma-informed community networks, like even Alexandria, who I've been able to step in and learn from, and other people who have just reached across Tickens to be there for each and every one of us. So I've been in on multiple projects across different Tickens and other community members who have just been open to what it means to really be a trauma-informed Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your comments and participation. With that being said, I'm going to pass it back to Lauren for the community members' chance to ask some questions.
Thank you, Tamika, and thank you to all the Tickens for sharing all the important work that you've been accomplishing. The next phase of this conversation will include conversations with community members. And I'm gonna kind of combine the first two questions. So for this event, did you have prior knowledge of your local trauma-informed community network? And if so, what is your understanding of the work that it does and the networks they serve? So I will open that up to anyone who would like to take themselves off mute and participate. Are there any community members represented, not officially associated with the Ticken represented, I should ask? So we may potentially all be trauma-informed community networks represented, which is great. This is a great network of people. So Chloe, I will say that, do you want to open it up for further questions within the trauma-informed community networks?
I think we can use this as a networking time. So if
Sure.
you have questions to ask,
I can mention the authentic engagement. Yeah.
there, and then we can open up just for some networking and dialogue and reach across Tickens.
That would be great. So let my notes back. So next, we're going to briefly talk about the benefits of voices of lived experience at the table. We're also going to drop this one pager in the chat here in a moment, but wanted to make you aware that Voices developed this one pager about authentically engaging youth and young adults that highlights on the front. It's almost kind of like a Likert scale, if people are familiar, where it gives a value based on the degree of participation. And the back also has further information, and I will drop that in the link for you guys. For me as a researcher, I just wanted to talk about for a moment the importance of elevating the voice of those with lived experience with the data. I like to say that data is important, but it's meaningless without the appropriate context. So understanding beyond the numbers and the unique experiences and identities that come with that data is very important. So I know Tamika has done work in this space as well, so I wanted to give her an opportunity to speak to what it means to her as well.
Thank you, Lauren. And I will kind of piggyback off of the question from the last slide. I was one of those community members at first, and I will say that for the most of us, no, I did not know that it was a such thing as a Ticken. I didn't know about trauma. I didn't know about resilience. I didn't know about ACEs. I didn't know about any of this. So I can only imagine to the people who still live where I live, and that's from where I'm from, they still probably have not heard about it. And that was part of my position. So I will say that part of why I think community voice is important is by what I just said. We're not exposed to this type of information on a regular. It's not put in our laps. It wasn't in the schools. It literally was nowhere. And I know for me going to an event and having a space that was set aside just for me to speak as a parent, I was noticed. So that goes back to making it beneficial, not for just the committee or the space that's providing it, but for the person who's giving their voice at the same time. Me giving my voice was not only beneficial to them for hearing it, but it was beneficial for me because I was getting great exposure, not only to this wealth of information and this wealth of knowledge, but this is how I obtained my position with SCAN. Someone seen me speaking at an event. And it's not that, I know a lot of times people will say that, people don't care and things of that, but it's a lot of untapped potential in these communities, and people have a lot to say. They just want to know that they're not being taken advantage of. And I heard someone say being intentional about the space you provide. That's it. When I seen that they were intentional about the time, it was during the morning, my kids were off to school. I didn't have to worry about sitters or none of that. So just knowing that it was something intentional and not just, oh, we need some community voice at the table. Let's just get some people to come sit at the table. No, that's not it. Just really being intentional. And that's what I love about SCAN and so many other organizations that I'm starting to see now that's really being intentional about getting community voice and how valuable and important it is. I see it like this: when you invest in your community will invest in you and help you to get what you're looking for from the community. So the people, they invested in me, one person, and they've exposed me to this wealth of information, this whole other side of living. And now I'm able to take it and put my own spin on it so that I can share it back with the people in my community. And I've been doing that with my trauma and resilience training. And I also have a workshop on cultivating authentic community engagement. So if anybody on this call would like to take advantage of that, please feel free to reach out to anybody at Greater Richmond SCAN, and I would love to host a workshop for you guys. But to me, that's the importance of community voice at the table.
Tamika, I was just noticing your passion and your smile, and just like your whole face lit up just now. So that says a lot. That says volumes. So thank you for sharing your perspective and your work.
I love what I do. It doesn't feel like I'm working at all.
Yeah, sorry. I'm a little teary-eyed. So I will pause and say, are there any last final comments, questions, or concerns, or things you want to talk about authentic community engagement, or any last final words before we do our conclusion and networking?
Lauren, I don't know if you can see the chat, but there's a number of comments about engaging with youth directly in the TICNs that a few folks are commenting on and might want to add more from their experience.
Yeah, that would be great if others want to jump in.
Would love for Ray's to add on.
So this is Tina with the Wautekin and Winchester, the Winchester Area Trauma Informed Community Network. I think it is important for us to incorporate youth. They have so much information and they're passionate, and they also do inspire other peers, that they have to share their experiences too. So although we're young and we're still working towards some of the priorities that some of the other chickens have established, that is one of our goals, is to have more of the youth forums and opportunities and spaces for children, young people, to be brave and to share. I think it's contagious, and it helps other young people know that they're not alone, that their trauma may be unique. They may feel that they're the only ones that are going through that, but then to see that others are, and at different stages of healing, being able to share. I also wanted to say that I love the fact that the collaborative efforts that and support that we've received through Chloe and Lauren with all the data, because data drives everything, Melissa for all of the support and documents, and times where I've called and said, help me understand this. But I just want to say it's a collaborative effort, and I appreciate all the support that we've been able to get through the tickets that are already established and other supports. I also wanted to mention that we're also, I think Brian mentioned earlier, we were also a recipient of the FACT grant, one of the many FACT grants. So we appreciate that. But thanks for all that you guys do. And thanks for being there for informational purposes, support, moral support. and tools as we move forward with our TICN and our priorities.
Tina, did you want to add on about the mentorship program that you all have been leading and your work around youth, even the pilot that you all were imagining center?
I can briefly. I want to leave some time for networking, but yes. So one of the things that changed for us, so through our organization with I'm Just Me movement, really serving youth that have experienced primary and secondary trauma. It's a program called Courage, but everything was in person, and everybody was, geared towards this in-person experience, which we did well. But we were also prepared for the virtual ways that we could reach kids when they were offline. So when COVID happened, we said, okay, what can we do? Let's implement those opportunities to still connect, because we know that reporting would go down and that eyeballs and people that have connections with these children would no longer be there, and we wanted to stay connected. So we got approval to still connect with children through Zoom and FaceTime and different ways. So that, even though COVID happened, it opened up this whole new world, an idea, to be innovative, which other people weren't quite prepared to do. We continued to serve families that needed us, connecting them with resources, whether it was employment, young people that just felt isolated and alone, some of them contemplating suicide because they just felt so disconnected. And so at any rate, we were glad to be able to serve as a resource and to continue to share with these young people that, they have tools and that they can be resilient, and that they could be supported even though they felt so disconnected. So innovative ways to serve people. And I think even through the TICN, going virtual, I think has been a lifeline for a lot of our young people.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to put a plug. We do have Are You Informing or Are You Engaging Youth and Young Adults Authentically, August 27th at 9 a.m. as well. Any other folks wanted to add on? Raise, I know you all do a lot of work with youth as well.
Yeah, it's probably because my full-time job with the City of Alexandria is that I am the Children and Youth Community Plan Coordinator, and so I already have these natural connections into the community of other people that work directly with youth. And I'll share a tip for engaging a lot of youth. When we were developing our plan for the next 5 years, I formed these partnerships with the public school teachers teaching civics and US government classes. So that's where they're already learning about how to affect change in their local community, how their government works, who's addressing certain issues that are affecting their families. And so we just went into the classrooms. We went into like 89 classrooms and engaged thousands of youth for an hour at a time in these workshops called I think it was called the Build Your Legacy workshop, because it was their opportunity to leave their legacy in their community. And it was the workshop was designed and titled by youth themselves. So that was an amazing partnership, and it's still, we benefit from it today because many of those youth continued to engage in ongoing weekly planning to get this citywide plan done that improves outcomes for children, youth, and families. And then we ended up engaging a lot of the same youth in a youth forum during one of our RAISE network meetings, just to learn about how the pandemic and racial injustice was affecting their mental health. And as Tina mentioned, we're hearing this theme over and over again about the huge concern of youth mental health right now. I mean, it's always been a huge concern. The pandemic only magnified it with their isolation. And so, yeah, our network also has a member engagement plan that we just developed, and it focuses on youth in particular. And I love the Hearts Ladder. I love referring to it when working with other youth service providers. to meaningfully and intentionally engage youth as partners and co-designers of projects. And so that's some of the stuff that we have gotten to do with youth. I love working with young people. And so one of the ways that I do that is to go to them, partner with the adults that have connections to youth, and try and wiggle my way in, and invite them to be leaders in RAISE. And that doesn't have to mean that you attend meetings. One of the things that we're doing is starting a youth committee where we are partnering with a youth-led group in the high school that's focused on mental health, and we're offering, like, how can we support you in your work? So those are some of the ways that we've gotten to. Thank you.
Can I just ask a follow-up question and then I'll step down because I'm taking up too much space. But Chelsea, when you find, what I've heard in the past is that when engaging with youth, it's best to create a youth-specific space. Like, you can't expect, on a power dynamic, youth and adults to be equal in a space. Do you find that the engagement is more effective when the spaces are literally just youth and created for youth?
Yeah, it's probably more effective when it's like a youth affinity group, I'd say. But I've seen it work well too if there is an adult who approaches it in the true spirit of partnership and supports youth rather than just throwing them into a project and saying, like, good luck or whatever, that they're walking together in that process. They're offering their support. How can I help? What do you need? I'm here for you.
Well, we have just a few minutes left. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining today. Chloe did drop a link in the chat there's also a presentation on August 27th from 9 to 10:30 about authentic engagement. If you're interested, there's still a ton of events for the rest of the week, and we're really super excited about. We hope to see you at the rest of the events. Feel free to stay on for a few minutes. If you'd like to converse in the chat, you can direct message people. Or if you have any other questions, we can stay on for another moment or two. Thank you all. Feel like I should have background music right now, but
Well, I will just throw this out here since we're quiet. I don't know if there are other tickets here, but I would love to have any documents of governance or things that you guys have learned or any tips that you have learned, because we definitely, in our next meeting, I have been tasked with finding out what has worked for other Tickens and what, governance wise, some do's and don'ts and must haves. So anyone that wants to share any of those documents, and so I've got here in our 3 priorities that we have, in our strategic planning, we've got good governance, and part of that was developing a roadmap for the Tickens long-term success, continually assessing and evaluating for effectiveness, both for the Ticken and in the community, and an intentional focus on underrepresented and marginalized groups. So if you guys have some good governance tips, documents, frameworks, like, I would love to have it. Anything that you want to share. And I can put my email in the chat. We only have 3 priority.
Did audio go for everyone else too? Okay. Sorry, Dina, we lost your audio again.
But Tina, we have a Virginia TICN meeting coming up in a couple weeks, and I've been taking really good notes during this whole event because there were some really great things that were mentioned, and I think lots of opportunities to share. So I will make note of that and maybe put out a request, Tina, to everybody to start sharing more of their documents and resources so we can kind of all house it in one spot.
That would be great. We can also, when we do the email out to everyone who registered today, we can add that in as well. Well, is there anything else? I like to usually end on time. Is there anyone else? Well, I would call that a success.
This was great. This was really great.
If anything, I just loved how collaborative and engaging it was. And so we'll keep that and for the future.
That's good. Well,
Thank
you,
everyone. Thank you, Tamika. You're always so good at moderating too, Tamika. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Tamika, I definitely want to hear your workshop at another time, so I'll reach out.
Okay.
Thank you all.
This was awesome. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night, and thank you in advance for anything that may come through my email that could help us on our journey to strengthen our trauma-informed community network here.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.